And welcome to the Back to Your Best Rehab Podcast. Today we have Luke Nelson, who's a sports chiropractor who works out of Health and High Performance down in Melbourne. Are you guys in Melbourne?
Yeah, Melbourne, yeah, down in sunny Melbourne. Not quite as it's raining and freezing outside at the moment.
Yeah, we're a bit like that up here in Brizzy at the moment. And Luke specializes in working with runners and running associated injuries. So welcome to the podcast, Luke.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks very much for having me on. And any day I get to talk about running is a good day. So looking forward to chatting more about that with you this morning.
I've been excited to chat to you. You've been a big inspiration and leader in the sports chiro and the sports physio world. So big thank you for that. It's so good to see such great information coming, especially in the sports chiro realm, and getting us some good representation out in the broader public in that regard. Today, we're going to dive into running injuries and some of the common running injuries, but we're going to delve a little bit more into Achilles tendinopathy, which is a very, very common runner's injury, one that can be really, really challenging for people, one that you've got a lot of experience in. So I want to pick at your brain a little bit about that. So if we can start, Luke. In fact, Luke, why don't we start with a bit about yourself? Skip that part if you want
Yeah,
to
yeah, no,
tell everyone a bit
no,
about yourself and your history there.
Yeah, okay, as you said, we'll skim through this so we can get into all the good stuff. But as you said, sports car based in Melbourne. Big large proportion of my patient base these days are distance runners. See also a mix of other sports as well too, but also a running coach. So I've got the privilege of coaching a number of runners, so I get to see it sort of from a clinician point of view, and then also from a coach's point of view. That's something I sort of evolved into over time. I've sort of found myself as a clinician, having these chats about, what people should be doing. And so it just sort of, has been a natural transition into that role. And I've really enjoyed doing more and more of that over the years. And then also a husband and a dad to two beautiful kids. So I've got a full plate, but yeah, very happy with all I've got.
The most important job.
That's it.
And tell us a bit about day to day. What does a day for you look like in the clinic or working with your coaching clients?
Yeah, so I'd sort of do 3 full days in clinic and then a half day still work the Saturdays every so often. Those days is a mix of actually face to face and also some telehealth as well too. So I do telehealth with some patients. The vast majority of my consults though are face to face, and I really enjoy the range of conditions that I'm working with. I mean, as I said, I'm a large distance running cohort, so a lot of them will be runners, but I enjoy the variety of different sports and field sports here, like soccer and AFL footy and court sports, basketball, netball, those sort of things. So I like that variety. So that's my day to day. So I'm seeing patients face to face, and then on my other days, so my non-clinic days, that's when I'm often doing programming and having calls with chatting with my coaching clients and also designing programs and just keeping a track of seeing how they're going. So yeah, that sort of fills up my days. I always start with a large to-do list, and then it often ends up expanded by the end of those days. So I always overestimate and yeah, mate, and underachieve, as I say, on those days. But I've learned to used to be a real, I used to get to the end going, gosh, I never get anything done. But I've learned to let go of that now. I just get done what I can and let go.
Yeah. And did you get into the running side just from your love for running personally?
Yeah, yeah, I did. Yeah, it was just something that, again, like I've been in clinical practice for my 22nd year, I think now. And so initially when I started practice, I was working with quite a diverse patient group. And then over time, I just enjoyed, seeing more active patients and being involved more in sports. And then that sort of then further evolved into running as I got into distance running and just loved talking running all the time with them. It was a sport that I was really passionate about, and then we've also gone through a bit of a running boom at the moment. In the last certainly in the last few years post COVID, but I was already sort of shifting into that space anyway. It just happened to coincide with then we've had this real explosion of people getting out there, and whether that be running, doing fun runs, or getting into run clubs, which are now all the cool thing to be doing, or if that's just running solo and just for physical and mental health. So certainly a big uptake in people getting out there and pounding the pavement, which is awesome to see.
Yeah, I was going to say the boom in running clubs, even up here in Brizzy, Southeast Queensland, where we are, has been amazing to watch over the last couple of years, really.
Yeah, it's
So tell me a bit about, let's talk about injuries and starting to kind of get into that realm. And in your clinical world, what are the most common things that you see? And yeah, let's dive into those.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, with running and running is, well, you certainly wouldn't classify it as a contact sport, but it's certainly a high impact sport in that there's a lot of forces involved in running. Every time that our feet hits the ground, it's landing with 2.5 times your body weight of force. So that's a lot of force going through, the lower limb in particular. So our feet, our calves, our knees and hips. And so then doing that over and over again, step by step. So there's a lot of cumulative load that we deal with when we run. And so unfortunately, then that can result in running injuries. And we see from the research that number can vary between 20 to 80%, but the general accepted figure when it comes to running injuries is about 50% of runners will get injured, which is quite high. The type of injuries I see, I tend to see. So you've got tendinopathies, which we sort of mentioned earlier on. So your plantar heel pain, your Achilles tendinopathy, patella tendinopathy, gluteal tendinopathy, hamstring tendinopathy. They're sort of the ones I tend to see mainly there. Muscle strains, occasionally calf strains, definitely. Hamstring, not as much in distance runners, but certainly see that in my sprinters and field athletes. And then sort of more joint involvement, you've got patellofemoral pain, which is also called runner's knee because it's one of the more common injuries, ITB pain, and then your bony type injuries, which are a medial tibial stress, and then unfortunately the bone stress injuries, which is something that I've seen a big uptake in unfortunately in like the last few years, seeing a considerably more bone stress injuries than I ever have before. So they're the ones we'd never like to see because they do involve some significant time off from running. But thankfully, the vast majority are injuries that can be managed and often managed to be run through with them as well too. So the runner can keep back and keep.
Yeah. It's a funny one, the bone side of things as well, like bone
Mm,
stress injuries. We've also noticed this increase in incidents in our clinic with these
yeah,
emerging. What
yeah.
do you think with that bigger intake and people or uptake in running that's been going on? There's a pattern to that. Are people
With
getting
the
into it a bit too fast, or do you
Yeah,
think there's
definitely. I
a
think
correlation there?
I was teaching on the weekend, teaching a group of health professionals over in Perth, and we had a discussion about, there's no school of running for people, want to start doing this thing. And it's great. One of the good things about running is it's accessible because all you need is a pair of shoes. But then unfortunately, there's nowhere to really sort of say, well, hey, maybe you shouldn't be doing this, or you shouldn't be running into doing 7 days in a week running. It's just all about building your body's capacity to tolerate that. And I think people can quite easily overstep that mark early on because a lot of the times with these injuries, they are more what we classify as overload injuries. They're cumulative over time. It's not something like, I tripped and fell and sprained my ankle. That's what we'd call an acute, injury that just begun. They tend to be more things that build up over a period of time. So people don't sort of notice things until, look, it sometimes can be 4 to 6 weeks down the track where they've done something silly, in that month preceding, but then it catches up with them down the track there. So again, I think our role as clinicians is a really important one in that educating our runners on some guidelines on what they should be doing, managing pain, talking about recovery and those sort of things there as well too. So there's that. And I think also just the multidisciplinary or multifactorial nature of running injuries too. There's lots of things that can contribute to running injuries, and general health is a really important one. I think we all tend to work live in a very busy, fast-paced society these days, and stress is very high, and recovery is often not great in terms of sleep, and so that can all contribute to these things developing as well. So I think it's certainly multifactorial, but unfortunately, the accessibility of running means that you could just get outside there every day and not notice it until down the track.
Yeah, I think that's where that component of a good community, maybe with a coach, becomes
Mm.
so important just to help guide that process. Do you find that kind of athletic age or that running age, so to speak, that how long they've been running for plays a role? Are injuries more
Yeah,
prevalent in the first 1 to 2 years, or is there a
yeah.
pattern there?
There certainly is. I mean, there are injuries that we tend to see that are more common in newer runners. So some of the knee-based issues, so like patellofemoral pain and ITB, tend to be in newer runners, and the same with medial tibial stress as well. And then in our advanced runners, so the runners that have been doing it for a while, they tend to be a bit more prone to tendinopathy and also bone stress injuries as well, which we can see. And again, you can see them across the spectrum. Like you can see, more advanced runner developing patellofemoral pain, and you can see a newer runner certainly develop a bone stress injury. But they're probably the trends and what some of the research supports as well in terms of years of experience. Relevant to Achilles tendinopathy, like there's been some research showing that really most runners, like if they've been doing it for long enough, most will experience some tendinopathy in that time. So there's a bit of a joke that I say, oh, if you haven't had Achilles tendinopathy as a runner, just wait another decade, and if you keep going with it, you eventually will come into it. And that's not to fear. That's not to fear. Running and fear the onset of these things, because I think if you're smart and you make good decisions with these things and get on top of them early, then it stops small problems becoming big ones. And as the saying goes, a stitch in time saves nine. So I think that a lot of these things can be curtailed if actioned on at the right time.
Yeah. Okay. And then I guess that kind of brings in the question around what are some of the things people can do to reduce risk of injury there?
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a lot of talk about strength training and what you mentioned before around general lifestyle factors. What are
Yeah.
the kind of most powerful things people can utilize to reduce their risk?
So if we look to the research base looking at risk factors, there's not a lot that comes through consistently, and I'll talk about why that is in a sec. But one of the ones that does come through again and again is having an injury, and that's having any injury actually. So what we've always got to consider. So if you come in with an Achilles injury, but you've had a patellofemoral pain or had some hip issues for a while, what we sort of got to, I guess, question there is are you making the same mistakes? So the same thing that set that hip pain off last year, has that also then contributed to your Achilles developing? Then we've also got to think, well, have you actually properly rehabilitated that area? So sometimes we find that if someone's had hip pain, they may have weakness in that area, which they just let the pain settle, but then the weakness can still remain, and then that can then have a knock-on effect further down the chain. So that's certainly something we want to look at from a previous injury. When the research, what happens in research is that they take a group of individuals and they put them into a group, and then they look through that group and they see, all right, what's a common factor in this group? And so what often happens is, because you've got different contributing factors in here, like we might have this runner over on one side who's just done too much. They're healthy, they've got good strength, but they've decided they're going to run a marathon a day, and they've got hurt. And then you've got this person on the other side over here that is not very strong. They're highly stressed, and they've only done a little bit of running. But if you look at sort of the common factors between them, there's not really any common things that stand out through there. And then that's why I think that research is great, and it's certainly got its place, but that's where we really need to be looking at the person in front of us. We have to see what are the contributing factors for that person there, and then that's part of our management for this as clinicians. We then say, all right, well, we need to work on this, and this, and then let's set about a management plan that's going to address all those factors there. Risk factors, yeah, there's lots of things that can contribute to it. We mentioned those multifactorial nature. If we're looking at some of the things, it would be certainly training load. So, how much someone is doing, their mileage, how often they're running. So they're running every day, they're having a day in between, the speed. So are they just running every run really hard? Then we've got things like their life stress. So, being really stressed in life can actually reduce your capacity to be able to handle training. So we want to have a discussion about that. Sleep's one of our most potent recovery tools that we've got in our arsenal, and it's free. But for some people, there are challenges to that, whether that be kids or a new puppy like we've got at the moment that's doing that, or some other health conditions as well can knock into sleep. And it's not certainly, I work with a lot of perimortem, and sleep for them is horrible with hot flushes and that sort of stuff. So there's certainly times that you can't control that, but sleep is a really, really important one. Occupational stress, people that are standing on their feet all day, that does put an increased load in through their knees and their feet, and so that may not leave a lot of room for training on top of that. So that's sort of from a stress side of view. And then from I guess on the other side of you, I like to use a seesaw analogy. So on one side of the seesaw, we've got these stresses. So we're piling on a lot of life stress, we're piling a lot of training stress. Well, what have we got on the other side to balance that? And then I look at things like, all right, what's that person's capacity like? So, their strength. Have they got good strength in the tissues that we need them? Mobility in the areas that we need them as well. Their running mechanics, so how they run, how they move will dictate where the forces are distributed for that person, the type of shoes that they wear. And so really when I'm assessing a runner, that we want to be looking at all these things and figure out where that particular person needs to what they need to address. Strength training, like you mentioned before, being as a preventative, it's actually that the research on prevention for strength training there are some studies that have supported that. There are some studies that haven't shown that, but generally the studies that have worked well are the ones where they're lifting heavy, so they're pushing themselves. And so obviously, as you imagine, doing light exercises or body weight exercises often not enough to cut it. You might start that way, but you need to progress through that. And also studies where they've shown that the compliance is important, and that's kind of makes sense, doesn't it? You've got to do the work to actually see the results. So those that don't do the exercise, it ain't going to work. So I am a fan and advocate for strength training. I think that again, when I'm assessing my runners and seeing that they're deficient in a strength, well, that's where we're gonna take them into the gym.
Yeah, it's such a interesting kind of realm because you see so many different factors feeding, and all those factors may or may not contribute, and it's sometimes hard to identify the driving contributor in that regards,
It
whether it
is,
be
and
sleep or nutrition or yeah.
yeah. And I think, look, and that's why I love doing what I'm doing, in that, everyone is different. Every person that comes through that door, whether they've got, Achilles tendinopathy, is they can have a totally set of different contributing factors. And so that's what, I love my work is almost as a detective to work out, well, what's going on with this person and how we can better it. And sometimes it can be things that we, for instance, if it is sleep and we can't work on that, well, we sort of say, all right, we can't improve the sleep, but let's try and work on some other things that we can improve, that we can modify, and see if that can get more balance back into those scales. And it can just be that, we say to the individual, I've had this happen recently where, I've had some of my runners that are just going through incredible periods of stress in their lives. And I've just said to them, look, this is not the time for you to be, really trying to be peak fit and piling on this stress and, training for this, trying to get this PB in the marathon. It's just not the time to do that. And yeah, that happens, unfortunately, that we've got lives and we're not, professional athletes and even professional athletes have got stress in their lives too as well. So it's all something that we need to consider, that the weighting on that seesaw.
I think that segues well into a topic that I wanted to touch base with you on, which is running for many people, especially more experienced running, is part of their identity, or they feel like it's part of their identity, that if you take running away out of their life, or if they miss a day of running, that can be a bad day in their world. And when you throw things like training load management, which sometimes requires them to scale back a bit, like you were just alluding to there, if you go through a stressful period in your life, you might need to scale back a little bit on your running to maybe prevent some injury. That can be a really difficult conversation for many runners. And in my experience, we talk often about training decisions, helping people make better training decisions around different aspects of their life. That can be a real tough one to get people to adhere to want to do,
Yeah.
purely because they might be running for a reason that's got more to do with their mental health.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's a stress management, one of their stress management strategies.
Yep.
So for people like that, for people who really identify deeply, who running is just such an important role in their life, and they're going to either need to peel back due to injury or need to peel back just to maybe prevent further pain or injury. What are your strategies there? How do you help them go through that?
Yeah, and you raised some really good points in what you just said. In that, from a mental health reason, so certainly runners do exactly that. In fact, I did just a random survey a few years ago, just of the next 10 runners that came through my door. I just asked them, why do they run? And it was I think it was World Running Day, and every single one of them said mental health, and there was a wide range of abilities in that group that I surveyed. So some that were very competitive runners, and others that just wanted to run a couple of times a day, a couple of times a week, sorry. And so mental health is a really big one. And then also what you said too about with them identifying as a runner is exactly that. It's part of their identity. They've often got their running groups. They catch up with their friends on a running group on a Tuesday and a Thursday for track night. They're doing their long run with friends, and that's their opportunity to chat about their life and vent their stresses. So that's a really big part. When you take that away, some people really struggle, and that's where there was actually an image just on the weekend when I was teaching. I put up an image of a runner and a health professional, and the runner says, "It hurts me to run," and the health professional's answer is, "Well, just stop running." And I said to the people, the professionals in the group, I said, "Do not be this person. Do not just blanket say you can't run." Now, thankfully, for most running injuries, you can continue to train to some extent, and that's usually modifying so whether that we cut down the distances, we cut down the elevation, we cut down the speed. Most of the time, we can run. And like what I tend to say is that if you can keep the pain under a 4 or 5 out of 10, then you're good. Okay, so that's 4 or 5 out of 10 when you're doing the running, after the run, and then the next day. So long as we're not seeing big surges in pain after that, then we can continue. The only exception to that, I'd say, is bone stress injury. So that's something we don't really want to have pain with. So we want to have zero pain with those particular injuries. But most others we can continue. There are times when so say for instance a runner comes in and their Achilles tendinopathy is they can't hop, and that's usually a sign that things are really quite agitated, and running causes them an 8 out of 10 pain. Well, yes, we are going to have to put a pause on running for the time being. But what I educate to that runner is I'm saying, look, at this stage, that Achilles is not enabling you to run. So what we're going to do is we're going to work on these things over here, and we're going to progress you back into running as soon as we can. Okay, so my job is to get you back into running as soon as you can. So it's not a blanket, just stop running. And I think that it really does annoy me, and I'd say that without using a swear word, so that we can keep the PG rating on this podcast. It really does annoy me when a health professional does that, because I think it's just really lazy, and it's like, well, what can they do instead? Okay, maybe they can't run at the moment. Well, can they get on a bike? Can they walk? Can they do some elliptical? Can they swim? Can they lift weights? What can they do? So I think it's just really lazy, and often what happens in that instance is the runner will just go somewhere else, and rightfully so, when they can sense that someone's not really doing the right thing by them. But like I said, there are times when we do need to stop, when things are just too sore, but I'm giving a reason why that's the case. We're giving them something to keep their fitness going, and working on whether there's been some strength deficits we've identified. We're working on that in the meantime. And there's a pathway and criteria that we want to sort of tick off to say this is when we're going to get back into running. And that can also mean too, like for instance, if they can't run at the moment, and they want to, that they still want to see their friends, I might say, well, go down there on a track night and you can do your rehab, and you can do, your modified running on those same nights. So you're still seeing people. The long run, you might ride your bike instead. So you're still around the group. You can still have a chat. And so yeah, there's some sort of things again, just to try and keep the runners involved in their sport. Much like when a team athlete gets injured, you're not just sending them off to the side and saying you can no longer contact the team. You're trying to keep them involved in as much as you can with the rest of that team.
And how important is a proper structured plan for these people? Because often we'll hear these random numbers that maybe a doctor or another practitioner is given a runner, for example. They might say, "Oh, you need to take 4 weeks off," which is a bit arbitrary, obviously. But what needs to happen in the time frame? Is it just a matter of time, or is it trying to hit certain benchmarks?
Yeah.
What does that look
So,
like on your end?
so I think, definitely, having a plan and having, some sort of, well, definitely some sort of structure is really needed for everyone, not just runners, but people like to know where they are, where they need to get to, and how they're going to get there. I tend to operate more on a criteria based than time based. So I think that probably the only exception would be bone stress injuries. So I do use more time based criteria for that, in that we have to offload for these 2 weeks, and then we go into these over these few weeks, and then we go into that. So I do explain to them the path that involved in that. For other injuries like Achilles tendinopathy, we might sort of say, okay, well, you're here at the moment, you can't jump. Jumping causes you high levels of pain. What we need to do is we need to get to jumping. Then once we can do that at a reasonable level, we can progress to hopping. Then maybe we might actually be able to start to incorporate some more running in through there. But we want to see the pain being under control. We might start with some walk runs. We might start easy, obviously, and then we're sort of progressively building up the distances, and then we might add some, some pace or some elevation to that as well. So we're sort of going and not overwhelming them, but this is certainly what's going on in the back of my mind, and how much detail they want to know is different from person to person. But certainly explaining to them that that there is a process and there are criteria that need to be met rather than versus.
Yeah. I mean, we work that criteria as well, but it can be tricky
Mm.
because people often want to know, like, how long can I expect
Yeah,
to be
and that's why I
being.
think, yeah, you're right. And I think you can give rough guides as well too. Like even, even with sporting injuries, like seeing an ankle sprain, and it could be like, all right, well, I think this is 3 to 4 weeks to return back to, back out in the field there. But we need to achieve these criteria. And if you get that sooner, well then if you fly through your rehab and you get through this, then we'll be back quicker. If you go slower, which some can, then it's going to take longer. So I think we still can sort of give an estimate on terms of weeks, but we always put an asterisk next to that saying if you move quicker, you're free to go back sooner. But if you take longer, then this will get stretched out. I think people understand that too, that you can't say, we don't have crystal balls to say, yes, Daniel, you'll be back in 2 days and 30 minutes. You'll be back returning to running there. So it's not
You,
no,
you,
not we're
you,
not
you,
quite there yet.
I was going to say
It's
you can't do that.
no, sadly not. It's
It's not that
damn. Teach
accurate.
me. We'll end this
I
podcast and
can
we can
tell
just
you.
have a chat afterwards on
Yeah,
how you work your crystal
exactly.
ball.
Buy my course, and I'll tell you exactly how to do that.
That's right. Take
Uh,
my money.
So from so we know a structured plan is important. We know having that good base understanding of what's going on and those other factors are important. How important do things like running technique and footwear, say, like those kind of things? Let's maybe start with running technique.
Yep.
How
Yep.
important is that from obviously both a performance standpoint or an efficiency standpoint, but also maybe an injury prevention or injury risk reduction standpoint?
Yeah. So I'd say my approach to running technique is that there's no one way to run. So we shouldn't all be running the same because we are all built differently and different heights and body proportions. So we're all not going to look the same. So that's the first thing. There's no one way to run, but there are often better ways. Something that I will assessing running technique is something that I do, and I do just as often as I ever have, if not more than I ever have. But it's then a matter of then do I intervene on that? Do we change that? And what I would say is that I would assess more than I have, but I would change probably less than I have because I guess I've learned over time and having been looking at running technique for probably the best part of a decade, if not longer than that now. I've probably learned over time what are things that need to be changed, what doesn't need to be changed. So certainly from a tissue point of view, like if we've got someone with an injury, then we can change their running technique to manipulate those loads, as in to reduce load away from an area. Sometimes, though, when we change technique, we can increase the load on another area. And a classic example of that is foot strike. So how we land on the ground. So if most people, the vast majority of people, really upwards of 90% of runners will land on their heels, and there's nothing wrong with that. Some will say, and I'm not one of those people, but some will say, we all need to be running on our forefoot and landing on our forefoot through there. Now, what happens with that is that as we transition from landing on a heel to our forefoot, it significantly increases the forces in through our foot and our calf and the Achilles. So, and I've seen a number of runners over the years that have presented to me with calf and Achilles pain, and I check them running, and I'm like, well, why are you running like that? Like, well, I'm saying it a bit more subtly than that. I'm like, oh, I can see you landing on your forefoot there. Is that something that you do naturally, or is that, something? And most of them have said, oh, no, I read somewhere, or someone told me once that I need to be running on my toes. And, it might have helped their knee pain at the time, or they may not have had any pain. They just thought it was the way to the run. But what it's done is it's really overloaded those calf and Achilles. And so you just don't know when you're speaking to someone how they're running. So I definitely, if a particular activity hurts, it certainly benefits to get a look at that activity and see what they're doing. So that's certainly from an injury point of view. I think that running mechanics and how someone moves can dictate where that stress is going to be placed. From an economy point of view, it's a bit more mixed actually with looking at running technique. There are certain factors that we find that are more economical. So when we look at good runners, there are things that they possess that are things like less overstride, so they're not landing so far out in front of their center of mass. There's less upwards and down movement, what we call vertical oscillation, where they're really sort of going too high up and down, and other things looking like, looking at pelvic drop as well too. So there's a few things from an economy point of view that we might look for. It's a little bit murkier in terms of changing someone's technique just to make them more economical. So if you came to me and said, "Oh, Luke, I don't have any pain, I just want to run faster," I'm probably a little bit more hesitant to make changes there. I have done it. It would have to be something really strikingly obvious for me to do that there. So, but yeah, the research from that is not so conclusive. But I think running gait, as I said, is an important thing to assess, because we just don't know what we're gonna see. And as I said, there might be some better ways to actually to move.
Do you think running a lot of the time is by feel? I mean, like I'm just talking from personal experience. I'm getting back into some running after not
Mm,
running for a little while, and I've just like organically just found I started very
yeah.
slow, and then just organically found a pace that seems to just feel good on the body, and I recover well. And
Yep.
uh, it is a lot of it just listening to your body and
It is. I mean,
playing that.
just yeah. I mean, whilst we're on the mechanics point of view, like people, beginners runners do, their technique does evolve as they get better, so things can change. So just because someone's running some way now, like if you give them more running, they can actually naturally evolve as their body finds a more efficient way to do things. Now, can we shortcut that by intervening through here? I'd like to think that that's possible for some, but there hasn't been any research that's looked at that. From a feeling point of view, I think that's great. And probably, you as a health professional and someone that's used to training, in the gym and has trained before, you've probably got a good awareness of what you should be doing. But for other runners, like they might not have that awareness, they don't have that knowledge. And so they don't know what things should feel like. And they think that, oh no, it's supposed to feel like I want to chuck at the end of it. And, I'm supposed to be really just pushing as hard as I can. And that's again one of the issues that we see with one of the mistakes that runners make is they just go too hard too often. So they do too much too soon, and they go too hard too often, and that's where we see these loading errors in a lot of these runners. And really, I mean, to get better at running, like anything, you just need to do more of it. And if you're constantly punishing yourself and going too hard on every run, you're not going to be able to recover for the next one, and then you're not going to be able to fit as much training in. I had a runner not that long ago, and he said to me, he goes, "Look, I run twice a week. I just want to go out there and thrash myself. It really helps me mentally." He came in with knee pain, so I'm like, "All right, well, let's have maybe a bit of a compromise here. You've come in to see me. We've identified these things. You're running pretty hard twice a week, and you've got this injury. We're going to work on some things to make you a bit more resilient. But maybe, how about you give me, we'll start you back running easy. But how about you do, one of those runs you can push yourself and go really hard, and one of them we'll just do a little bit easier. And that way we're not, constantly then punishing yourself during the week." And so he was happy with that, and went away and did that. But again, I educated him why that was the case. I just said, "Well, you're running too fast, just stop doing that." I'd educated him on how faster running is harder on the body. There's more, the forces go up across all areas, muscles and joints. The forces go up as we run faster, and then that requires more recovery.
Yeah. Yeah, I think people forget that recovery component of you push yourself hard, you're going to have sore muscles, sore joints. You're probably not going to get over a year, you're probably not going to get as many runs in through that
Yeah.
type of approach than something a
Yep.
little bit more moderate, but obviously take into
Yep.
context, why they run and what their driving factor is there.
Yeah, and there was there's a recent study last year that they looked at, had a big data set actually of runners. It was a few thousand, I think, runners that they had in this, where they got data off Strava and looking at race results, and there was a direct correlation between the volume of running and marathon time. So those that ran more got quicker times. So yeah, in order to do that, you need to be slowing down and allow your body to recover. And that's if performance is important to that runner. Not every runner is focused on times and running quicker and doing marathons. Some just like to get out there and, like this guy, thrash himself. And so it was just sort of educating him that is just hard on the body, and he can do that once a week. But how about on this other day we go a bit
So to finish off, I've got another two questions really. But the
hmm,
first one, what are some of those common things you still, the message, the negative messages or the outdated messages we still hear out in the public or through allied health or medical, those messages that just simply don't seem like they're going anywhere. They seem like they're not dying out. What are some of the things you still hear that you wish we would move on from?
So I reckon, well, running's bad for your knees is probably one, and that it's going to wear your joints out. I remember sadly years ago had a runner who was came to see me in his late 50s, and he'd been told by a health professional, it might have been 10 years before that he shouldn't be running because he had some knee complaints, and the doctor told him to, no, you just need to stop. Again, one of those examples of you just need to stop running. And he trusted this person. He said, oh, okay, well, my running days are done. And I saw him down the track, and he came in with some other other issues, and we just sort of got to talking, and we were talking about running, and I'm like, okay, yeah, well, why not? And anyway, we ended up turning into a runner, and he's done that quite successfully. But yeah, the research that's actually looked at that is there's been multiple studies now that have refuted the claim that running will give you knee arthritis. And in factual fact, one of the big ones from Horger's group is there's been a few studies actually, but one of them looked at comparing elite runners, recreational runners, and sedentary individuals, so matching across all three. And what they found was that the highest rates of knee osteoarthritis were actually in the sedentary group, and then the elites actually did have some higher rates as well too. But last down the very bottom was recreational. Now, thankfully, elite athlete is probably less than 0.1% of the worldwide runners, so it's not often we're dealing with that, and those guys are really pushing themselves. And again, it's not. They're going for performance. It's not always particularly healthy. They might be having, anti-inflammatory medication all the time, or cortisone injections, which are terrible for joints. So that's a sort of a separate aside there. But recreational runners, actually good for your health. And there's a really cool study that was Horger's group that did this one, where they did MRIs. So they did MRIs on this group of people, put them through a running program, and then for over a period of 12 weeks, I think it was training for a marathon, and then MRI'd it in the end, and they actually showed some reversal in some of this cartilage degeneration, and some of the things that didn't look so great on the first scan. They actually found a reversal, which is again sort of almost unheard of, that we see the rebuilding of joints, and so yeah, I think that where the confusion lies with that is that people are often given a very mechanical explanation of we're like cars, and the more you use us, the more we're gonna wear down. But in actual fact, we're not machines. We're living things that adapt and get stronger. And so what happens when we run is we stress an area, but then our body comes in and says, oh, okay, we need to make this strong, so let's get in there and let's get all those cells winding up and build those muscles around there, get some supporting through that, and that's how we actually see health improving and our bodies getting stronger, because we're not machines. We're adaptable human beings, and that's what makes our job really cool, is seeing just how adaptable we.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, it's the best thing that we do as humans is adapt. And if we
Mm,
de-stress, if we take too much stress away, it's a problem as well, because then we lean into deconditioning those tissues because they're not challenged
yeah, yeah.
on a frequent basis, which is what they need to grow and change.
And then probably the only second one, I said you said that was the first one. I mean, the second one would be probably around strength training. I think that there's often a misconception about runners with strength training. I think that thankfully there's a lot better knowledge around these days, and one of the upsides to social media and the access to information is that, so long as the information is good, that there's more distributed about that now. So a lot of runners know that there's certainly benefits to strength training that they can't get from running, and that there is a need and a benefit to doing both, and that they're not going to get bulky or get slow by doing that. So I think that most runners that I see now know that they should be doing strength training. It's then a matter of whether they are doing it. And that can sometimes mean, well, I guess that's my job, in that starting them on that path, and that might be simply just giving them one or two exercises to do a couple of times a week, just to start down that path, rather than giving them an hour session and saying, oh, there you go and do that 3 times a week. That can be a little bit overwhelming, but yeah, strength training, I think, is now there's a lot better understanding, and more research now coming out about that. Around, we spoke earlier on about the injury prevention, that there might be some stuff there, and I personally think that there is. But from a performance improvement point of view, strength training definitely can help improve our performance. And most runners want to get faster. As I said, not all, but most want to. So strength training can be a great avenue for that.
What can that look like for people if someone listening was running, say, 2 or 3 times a week and they wanted to incorporate a bit of strength work, does it need to be multiple times a week? Does once a week go? Is it better to go a bit higher volume, more reps, lighter weight, or the
Yep.
reverse of that? Does it have to be single leg? What generally,
Yeah.
what might that look
So
like?
I think that I mean, from in terms of what the research suggests for benefits for strength, like usually twice a week at a minimum, and that's often when I'll start runners. And if they want to do a third session a week, that can help them get better a bit faster. Any more than that doesn't necessarily get you a lot better quicker than from what you put into it. So I usually say 2 to 3 times a week. What are some of the exercises that we'll put in there? You really want to target the key muscle groups. So number one, the calves. Love the calves. They're my favorite muscle group. They do a lot of work when we run, so we definitely want to load those up. Then we might go our quads, which are the second group. And then we're sort of working around through the hips and around through the core there as well. So sort of working in those sort of three areas. Single leg or double leg, there's certainly merits for both. Like single leg is great for if, especially if we've got an injury on one side, we need to train around an injury. Well, then we can keep going on the uninjured side, or if we've got a strength imbalance that we need to be working on there as well. And so in working in the injury space, I find a lot of my runners do have a deficit on one side, so that's where I'll opt for single leg. But if things are symmetrical and they're doing well, and then we can go for double. Another downside to going with double is have they got enough weights to be able to do things. So, if they're doing workouts at home and they're just doing some dumbbells, well, then single leg's usually the better way to go. Otherwise, they have to get barbells and load things up a lot heavier. Which brings us on to the next thing is, yes, I do like my runners to go heavy. So one of the other misconception is that I just need to do low reps. Need to do low load and high reps. So I'm going to do 20 reps of this particular exercise. Whereas what I like to do is really try and push people under 10 and even in that sort of that around that at 8 rep range or even less than that. So don't be afraid to chuck the weight on, keep the reps low, and then really what we want to look for that is having what we say 2 reps in the left in the tank or 2 reps in reserve, where we're getting to the end of our set. So we're doing our calf raises, we're getting towards 8, and we're like, oh, geez, I could probably only do 2 more here, and that's when you're finished. So you don't need to go to failure. So failure meaning like I'm done, I couldn't do one more. But you want to get sort of be near and close to it, and that's been shown to give better results from hypertrophy. And there's not sort of again there's not a magic number. So saying like if you must hit 8, if you hit 9, you're going to lose all your gains. It doesn't work like that. It does come down to effort, but I think that effort is a lot easier to ascertain from lower reps rather than if you're doing 30 reps of a particular exercise, you often just get bored or your mind starts to drift before you actually get physically tired. So that's why I think load it up, keep the reps low, and help you more accurately gauge that 2 reps in reserve. Because a lot of runners aren't sort of particularly gym savvy. They don't. And that's why they run. They don't like the gym. So some of them have never strength trained before, so they don't know what things should feel like or how heavy they should go. So I commend any of our listeners that are runners and are doing lifting weights. So you're doing a great job.
Yeah, that's a message I give a lot of ours. We also prefer the heavier weight, lower volume approach for our runners.
Mm.
A nice little selling point for them when they're starting is, when we do this approach, you're in and out of the gym a lot faster than
Yeah,
than doing the high volume
it's
stuff. Much
And
more
I
time
think certainly in
efficient.
terms of time, and just energy consuming as well too. That it's not some of them, especially if they're doing a marathon training, they're getting pretty tired anyway. So you don't want to sort of be piling on too much more stress. But I think it is a really important one. The other thing, actually, the other exercise which I'm a big fan of, and include some form of plyometric exercise as well too. So some form of plyometrics, jumps and hops. So things like that, which might start with just some submaximal pogo jumps, which is just jumping on the spot there, and we might just have them doing that for 20 or 30 seconds and then working those pogos up to being really explosive where we're really attacking the ground and only doing 8 reps of them in a row. And there was actually a good study just recently that looked at just giving people submaximal pogo exercises and with these particular runners, I think it was over 6 or 8 weeks, and it actually showed about a 5% improvement in running economy, which is pretty good, which is the same sort of effect you get from putting on a pair of super shoes. So, I say get the best of both worlds. Do your plyometrics, your strength training, and then you can use your super shoes as well to save you even more time.
To finish up, I'd love to get your advice maybe to someone listening who's a runner, who's maybe dealing with some more longer term recovery, whether it be that they're dealing with some kind of tendinopathy. What would your advice to someone like that be, just around their general approach, maybe mindset towards their recovery?
So look, it is, and dealing with a lot of running injuries can hang around. There can be some discomfort or pain, and tendinopathy being one of those. And it's not unusual for some people with tendinopathy to have pain for 6 to 12 months. So, things can drag on, pain can drag on for quite a long time. I like to, I like to with those people try and shift the focus from the pain. And this is not ignoring the pain, because we still want to do things that are keeping it below that 4 or 5. But sort of trying to shift the focus away from that, and focusing more on what they can do from a function point of view. If we're getting a runner that's coming in and they've got their Achilles pain is like say it's a 4 out of 10, and they're only doing 10 Ks a week. And then what we do is we progress them, and then we're getting up to, 20, 30, 40 Ks a week over here. We're doing some races, we're doing some running, some park runs, all these sort of things here. And their pain's still staying around that 3 or 4. That's still a win, because they've been able to increase and they're able to do everything that they want. So when I'm educating these people, I'll say, look, this might take, a while to completely go away from a pain point of view, but you'll be doing everything you want from a running point of view. Be able to do your races, you'll be able to get your PBs. It's not upsetting things from there. And people are pretty happy to hear that. They understand that, okay, yeah, things can take some time, and it doesn't, then they're not constantly focused on, oh, but it's sore, but it's sore. It's that focus on the function. So I think that's one thing, is not getting overly focused on, too focused on your pain. And the other thing, I guess, to address and think about is that, some of the stuff we've spoken about today is, considering all these lifestyle factors that can be having an influence on your pain and your issue as well too. So, are you very stressed at the moment? Are you getting adequate sleep, if that's something you can control? And your work stresses, nutrition, diet, that's another one we sort of didn't mention earlier on. But all these things can influence your current health. So really, in terms of accelerating and trying to get the best recovery you can, is just trying to be as healthy as you can, really.
Yeah. We say often, just what's in your circle of influence. Let's
Mm,
focus on that. What are the
yeah.
things that we can take direct control of immediately, which is often your broader health things, your nutrition, your mindset towards the recovery process as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect, Luke. Is there anything else we haven't really covered today that you think's important for runners with injury to know at all?
Oh, how many hours have we got? No, I think we've spoken about some good ones. Again, it's addressing those are sort of factors that some runners might not think of. They just think it's just purely due to running. Certainly trying to avoid those training areas of not doing too much too soon and not running too hard all the time. Look at lifestyle factors. Certainly things like strength training can be really beneficial from an injury management point of view, but also just from a performance view as well. But and again, don't listen to someone that tells you just to stop running unless you've got an injury and they've given a justification for that particular process. So if they've given you that without any sort of explanation, then turn around, run the other way, and then go and see someone like Dan or myself. So,
So that's a good segue into our final bit, which is tell people where they can find out more about you, your services.
yeah, excellent, mate. Yeah, well, look, probably the best way to find me is on through Instagram at SportsChiroLuke, or otherwise through my website, healthhp.com.au. And like I said, doing face to face, and also do telehealth services, and then also offering run coaching as well. So any questions I've got, more than happy to field them.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time. As I said at the beginning, you're real inspiration to me, and the impact that you've been able to have and the leadership that you've shown in the sports chiro field. So thank you from myself, I'm sure on behalf of many in the profession as well.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, mate.